it's time now to introduce to you someone who has been a catalyst in ensuring that the great memories of a wonderful human being, the late Dr. K.S. Basu, has stayed on over a period of time in the minds of all his followers, his admirers, his students, and so many people across the world. I'm welcoming on all our behalf, Sri Ravi Dhingra, all the way from the United States of America. Welcome, Professor Ravi Dhingra. Welcome to the Bombay Management Association. Thank you for joining us, and good morning to you specifically, because you're logging in all the way from the United States of America. Welcome.
Thank you.
I mentioned to you in the beginning of...
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks, Ravi. I'd like to have the privilege of saying a few words about you before requesting you to speak. I'd mentioned to you, ladies and gentlemen, in the beginning, that when Mr. Ernest Fernandez connected us with the late Dr. K.S. Basu Memorial Trust, the whole intention was to organize a series of events which could propagate the memory of this wonderful human being, innovator, thinker, management professional, and of course, a person so many people revere. Sri Sailesh Haribhakti did mention a lot about his experiences with the late Dr. K.S. Basu. I'm delighted to share that this K.S. Basu Memorial Trust is managed by a team of people which is ably coordinated by Professor Ravi Dhingra. He himself is an alumnus of the Jamnalal Bajaj Institute of Management Studies in Amchi, Mumbai, and then, of course, went on to pursue his management studies even at Wharton. Has been a marketing consultant with a great passion of teaching and sharing. So continues to be an adjunct faculty at the Sacred Heart University, at the Pace University. After a very successful career with leading organizations, including Bristol Mayors, he decided to be a consultant, and over the last 3 decades has been wearing both the hats very effectively. Thank you, Professor Ravi Dhingra, for agreeing to be part of this wonderful innovation conclave. Thank you to the Trust for supporting us and bestowing your confidence in Bombay Management Association as being your partner for such activities. May I request Sri Ravi Dhingra to say a few words on this occasion and set the tone of this entire collaboration between BMA and the late Dr. K.S. Basu Memorial Trust. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Mani, for your kind words. Thank you, Professor Das, for your insights on strategy and innovation. And good evening. The trustees of the Dr. K.S. Basu Memorial Trust are delighted to support and partner with the Bombay Management Association on this conclave on strategic innovation and future conclaves and webinars to come. A very timely topic that, along with agility and adaptability, is the focus and priority in every Indian and American C-suite today to gain and sustain long-term competitive advantage. I know, talking of adaptability, while the last few months of the pandemic have been quite challenging, BMA is adapting to the new reality and helping bring people together for these virtual conclaves and webinars are a small silver lining. Look at the positive side. You don't have to fight Mumbai traffic to rush to the events now. And we can all gather and share our thoughts comfortably from home. The Memorial Trust was formed several years ago to honor the memory and legacy of Dr. Kalyan Sundar Basu. How did he transform from a medical doctor to becoming a colorful and visionary leader and educator who inspired a whole generation and mentored a generation of students who have made their mark as CEOs, senior corporate executives, entrepreneurs, and industrialists in India and indeed around the world. What lessons can we take away from his life? There are four strong building blocks that, in my view, defined his life's work. The first, his drive for achieving excellence. In every sphere, he believed that whatever he did had to be done exceptionally well. This whole concept of kaam chalega was not in his vocabulary. The second was his very strong ethical principles and promoting good governance by corporate boards. He believed strongly in this. And remember, this was a time in the 60s and 70s where the concept of good management, particularly in family-held companies, was just emerging. Professional managers, the whole concept of professional Indian trained professional managers was just emerging. Third was fairness and discipline. He was a stickler for time and deadlines, values which he instilled in all those who worked for him and with him. Fourth was Indianizing management training and practices. His passionate belief in developing homegrown management talent based on an Indian management model rather than an adapted Western model. And again, recall that this was the 60s and 70s where management institutes, Indian management institutes, were just emerging. They were in their nascency. He was a real doctor who practiced internal medicine in pre-partition Punjab. His life journey and transformation from being a doctor in Lahore to becoming a leading management expert, educator, corporate boardroom director, advisor, mentor, institution builder, and inspiring leader is quite fascinating. Allow me, please, a few minutes to share some glimpses from his colorful life. Incidentally, some of you may know that Dr. Basu was one of the co-founders of the Bombay Management Association in the mid-50s and was its second president, who served a 4-year term from 1961 to 1965. He remained active in BMA throughout his life and would have indeed been very proud of this institution today that he helped build 66 years ago. After practicing internal medicine for a number of years, he wound up in Bombay after partition looking for work. He was hired as a factory medical officer at Hindustan, what was then Hindustan Lever. And that started him on his corporate journey. From there, his career took an interesting turn and he rose to become the personnel manager and later the head of HR. And he left his mark at Hindustan Lever by setting up the first in-house training and development department in the 50s to recruit and grow young talent, sales and management trainees for the company against much opposition from Lever headquarters in London, who said that could not be done. He was very proud of this accomplishment and eventually rose to be one of the first few Indians on the board of directors at Hindustan Unilever, along with Prakash Tandon. In 1960, he was the first Asian to be honored as a fellow of the International Academy of Management and later served as its vice chancellor, a very prestigious position. You know, in yet another career twist, he left Hindustan Lever in 1965 to become the first director and architect of the Jamnalal Bajaj Institute of Management at the University of Bombay, which he helped establish and organize, continuing his passion for training and developing young Indian managers. There were already a handful of leading management institutes in India at the time, with IIM Ahmedabad and IIM Calcutta, that were established 4 years earlier in collaboration with Harvard and MIT, respectively. But his vision of management was a little bit different. He wanted to create an institute that was uniquely Indian. He was a staunch advocate for homegrown management model, contextualizing management concepts and practices in the Indian setting, reflecting Indian values and management style. He wanted to adapt and not just adopt Western management theories and practices. Much to everyone's surprise and dismay, he turned down the generous terms of the collaboration provided by Stanford University, choosing instead to build an Indian Management Institute from scratch. Within a few short years, he created this distinct identity for the Jamnalal Bajaj Institute, and it was regarded as the 3 premier national institutes of management that companies sought out for young management talent, a legacy that has lived on for over 50 years. He was indeed a pioneer, and his name was synonymous with the evolution of Indian management education and training from the 50s through the 90s. And his model of education was quite interesting and unique at the time. He had only a small core of full-time faculty, relying instead on the talent and experience of distinguished corporate executives in Mumbai to bring their rich expertise into the classroom and bridge the gap between theory and practice. This relationship building with industry helped create a very robust ecosystem that benefited both Indian industry as well as the institute and its talented graduates, and proved to be a very successful management education model in Mumbai. Even his radical selection process spoke volumes about his leadership style and vision. In those days, the intake at the Institute was only 30 students per year. The whole college was 60 or 62 students, and I was always amazed how he could create this rich group and very diverse group of students every year. He used the tests, the grades, and interview process to construct a group that was a microcosm of India, a wonderful melange of students with a rich diversity of academic, cultural, and economic backgrounds from across the Indian geography, much to the dismay of the Bombay University, its chancellor, its registrar, who wanted a more merit-based system of pure academic grades, which was the standard in the rest of the colleges at the university. But he stood firm and created this diverse group every year. And the results of the process you can witness in the large number of graduates who have achieved great success in corporate and social spheres and as entrepreneurs and industrialists over the last several decades. By the 70s, he had become an internationally recognized management educator and practitioner and was invited to and traveled extensively to conduct lectures and seminars around the world. Little had I realized when he was absent from the university, he was traveling to the US, Australia, England, Russia, Japan, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, Holland, to conduct, to travel, to lecture, to conduct, to advise, to run seminars. He nurtured the Institute for 12 solid years. After leaving as director and professor in '77, he began his next logical innings, providing management counsel as board member, advisor, and mentor to a number of corporations and family-held businesses, including the JK Group, Mahindra and Mahindra, Mukund Limited, Hawkins India, the Piramal Group, Vickers Sperry, and a whole host of others, mentoring on growth, governance, and organizational design, in addition to his holding international association positions. There is a quote by Swami Vivekananda, which I think nicely sums up how Dr. Basu approached management education. Education, he says, is not the amount of information or the collection of facts that are put into the brain and rot there, undigested all your life. Rather, he said, we must have life building, man-making, character-making, assimilation of ideas. And thinking back to my student days at the Institute and subsequent interactions with him, it dawned on me that this was what he was trying to do, build character and not just rote of management theories. It was indeed a privilege to be one of his many students who owe their success to Dr. Basu. My fellow trustees and I thank you, Professor Mani, and the entire team of BMA for hosting this event, and all you attendees who have taken their valuable time to be here this evening. Dr. Basu would indeed have been very proud and honored that an organization that he helped establish 66 years ago is standing strong, growing, and hosting this inspiring conclave today. I can almost hear him right now and his hearty laughter with his evening customary drink of scotch in his hand, approving of this, of your work. Though I don't think he would have quite envisioned this whole virtual gathering thing. That would have certainly curbed his interpersonal style. The trustees and my fellow trustees and I look forward to collaborating with the BMA on a number and partnering on a number of upcoming conclaves and webinars. And thank you for the initiative and enjoy the rest of the evening's program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Dhingra. It was so soulful listening to you recounting all those wonderful memories of this great human being that many of us have read about, many of us have perhaps heard about, but coming from you was indeed very soulful. I once again appreciate on behalf of BMA the good intentions of working with us, and I assure you we will do our best to keep the memory of this great human being who founded perhaps two of the most prestigious institutions in Bombay, the Bombay Management Association, which you did mention about, and of course, the equally more reputed Jamnalal Bajaj Institute of Management Studies. Thank you so much for joining us this early in the morning, and we look forward to our continued interaction.
Thank
to continue
you.
Our BMA innovation. Thank you, sir. To continue the learnings of this innovation conclave, I'm indeed very delighted to welcome in our midst Dr. Rangapriya Kannan. Dr. Rangapriya Kannan is also coming in all the way from the United States of America. So good morning to you, Priya, and welcome to the Bombay Management Association. When we thought about this innovation conclave, one of the first things that came to mind is Are there any barriers, geographical, psychological, and economic when it comes to innovation? What are some of the key factors that enable innovation? What are some of them which inhibit innovation? And on that note, we felt it is good to call an expert who has perhaps done some global work in this area. And our obvious choice was the very, very eminent Rangapriya Kannan. Dr. Rangapriya Kannan, incidentally, just 10 days ago, was bestowed an accolade which is really praiseworthy. She has been voted as among the top 50 professors of business management at the undergrad level in the United States of America. Such is the stature of this young Dr. Rangapriya Kannan, whom we see here on the screen, smiling away. Although Ravi did mention a little bit of a scotch in terms of intoxication on a Friday evening, I can assure you, Priya, with the amount of research she's done, will be able to provide the right impetus to learning on this Friday evening. An alumnus of the prestigious Tata Institute of Social Sciences about 25 years ago. So it's her silver jubilee return in one sense on a forum like this. TISS, of course, is a revered institution for human resources. I have a lot of nostalgia because I too studied there and worked there. And Priya completed her course from TISS in 1996 and then went across the seas. And she has done her PhD from UCLA, UCLA. And I'm sure all of us know the reputation of this wonderful university. She currently is the chair of the Department of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the University of San Diego and has this unique honor of being the founder and catalyzer of an incubator accelerator in the field of innovation and entrepreneurship, which she currently heads as director. Thank you so much, Priya, for so readily agreeing to our request, and we look forward to a great evening of learning along with you. The stage is all yours. The session is all yours. Happy to state we have about 150 eager minds waiting to listen to you and understand a little more about success secrets of corporate innovators. Over to you, Priya.
Thank you, Professor Mani, and good evening, everybody. It's a special honor and privilege to be here today for several reasons. And thank you for that talk, Professor Dhingra, about Dr. Basu and the innovation. You know, it's very inspiring to be here. And I want to thank Professor Mani and the Bombay Management Association for offering me this opportunity. Again, like I said, Professor Mani he taught one of my first classes at TISS when I started. So it's really a privilege to be here. Having said that, I want to say I'm going to start sharing my screen in just a second. So the title of today's talk is, Secrets of Success of Corporate Innovators. And it is based on about 2 decades of research. And before I get into it, I will tell you that I'm not here to just lecture away for the next 30 minutes. So any questions, as Professor Mani encourages it, please have them ready for me, because I want this to be more of an interaction rather than just me talking all the time. So when we talk about the work that I'm presenting here today is based on about, like I said, about 2 decades of research. I've been interested in innovation and people. It's not even the innovations per se, but who are the people that are innovating? What are the challenges they face? So I'm really excited about that. And so a lot of my research work has been on interviewing corporate innovators and managers in Silicon Valley and in other parts of California, basically. And I also do work in India. And when you talk about corporate innovators, one of the things is, who are corporate innovators, right? So that's the first question. So if you are working in an organization and you have an idea, whether it's for a new market, whether it's a new product, new service, new processes, pretty much. And again, that's a whole question of who's the people that come up with new ideas to change, to create value for the organization. Now, one of the other things I also want to mention before I get into the secrets of corporate innovators is that when, if you look at the careers of people, we talk about entrepreneurs as one set of people, corporate innovators, you have social entrepreneurs, you have institutional entrepreneurs, you have all kinds of entrepreneurs. And we are talking about those that act as entrepreneurs within an organization. Although there are people in different contexts, the entrepreneurial mindset that you require to succeed is very similar in different contexts. However, an existing corporation presents special challenges. And as I go in the next slide here, innovation is hard, right? All companies, and I usually start one of my classes like this asking, how many of your companies believe in innovation? And most of my students would raise their hands and say, all our companies believe in innovation. These are executives. So most people would raise their hand. And then I ask them, how many of your companies are you in companies that do innovation really well? I'll probably have like 5 students in a class of 50 students, right? So innovation is really hard because although companies want innovation, it's a lot of challenges. It's going against what the company does. And you're asking them to do so, not all the times, but if it's something radically different from what the company has already been doing, there's always a resistance to innovation. You will always find, and this is, again, remember, I'm talking about Silicon Valley, which is supposed to be the hub of innovation, right? And it is. But even here, people do face challenges, especially individual innovators. And I think the impetus for my research came from talking to actually a lot of my friends who are engineers and who have these really, really brilliant ideas, but they're not able to translate it into something that their managers would understand. And what happens when innovators don't feel appreciated. So innovation is hard, and they usually hear things like, we have already done it this way. This is just, this is not going to work. We don't have the resources to make it happen. Our bosses are not going to like it, or that's not what we do as a company. So if you can list about 100 excuses, you will find lots of this feedback coming to innovators. So if you are trying to be in a corporation, trying to change what's going on, at the same time, you have this pushback, right? How do you deal with it? That's why my passion is the individuals, not the ideas themselves. And one of the other thing is, and if you go look at books on, how to be effective, how to be an innovator, one of the most, you'll say, take risks, ask questions, fly under the radar, don't tell people what you're doing, then come up with this, so you get all this conflicting advice. And then on the other hand, you'll find books that say, no, keep everybody informed, right? Tell everybody what you're doing, then you will gain all the support. So if you are actually an innovator trying to get an answer to how do I do this, you are going to get very generic advice on, take risks. I mean, we know that. Now what's next, right? So this was my question, and it still is in some ways, and I studied this in different contexts. Now it has kind of morphed into how do companies, do this against constraints. So given that innovation is hard, what are some of the principles? And I've just narrowed it down to 8. And again, each of this is just a flashlight, just a flash on, because you can't cover all this in an hour. That's why I said, ask me a question. If something intrigues you, ask me a question so I'll be able to elaborate more about it. So what do innovators do that are successful? So how did I arrive at these 8 principles? So I went to managers of organizations in companies, and I'm not naming them because of NDA and other contracts. But basically, this was like the companies in Silicon Valley, whether it's Cisco or Google, IBM, all of those. And then I asked I identified senior managers and companies, and I asked them, so who do you think is an innovator within your company, right? Because again, the title innovators is socially constructed. It's not like a vice president that you can put on your thing and say, I'm the vice president or I'm the director. Innovator is when other people think, especially within large companies, right? And entrepreneurs, because they are the founders. In large companies, you have all these people. So how do you identify innovators? So I went and asked them, so who do you reward? Who are your innovators? And then the senior manager said, you should talk to Bob. I'm like, fine. And I go talk to Bob and I ask, so Bob, your manager identified you as an innovator. What did you do? So I get Bob's story. Then I go back to the manager, talk to the manager, get their story to kind of triangulate the data. And then I ask Bob and the manager, are there other people in your company who are like Bob? So that's how this happens. So there's a snowball sampling, talk to lots of people. And this is kind of, it comes down, and I said, it's over about 100 interviews, about 3,000 pages of transcripts to pour through and get these 8 principles. So that's what happened in the background behind all these fun color slides, right? So what's the first principle that I found? The first success secret of innovators is the wow factor. So what is the wow factor? So innovators, and I'm going to use well-known examples for a couple of slides and then go into the details. So if you think about people like, Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, any of these innovators that are dominating Wall Street Journal today, they will say something that just makes you stop and think, wait, what? So for example, when, I don't know if some of you might actually be there with me 25 years ago, before we had, iPod and all the other fun stuff. I remember being in Bombay when it was Bombay still, going back to the shops, right? And then, there used to be these, when a new movie is released, what do? And you want the songs, right? You go to these different shops to cassettes. We used to have tapes back then, right? You go to these shops, you buy a tape of the latest movie, of the latest songs that's out. You'll have about 8 of them, maybe 4 per side, or 12 per, I don't remember exactly, but something. And then once the next movie is released, you go again, do this. You go to these little shops and the T-series and all those things. So that's the world I was used to. And in 2001, when Steve Jobs said, 1,000 songs in your pocket, right? With the iPod, I was stunned. How do you get 1,000 songs in your pocket? That is almost like half the room in my house with all those T-series cassettes filled up. So when you think about it, 1,000, so when Steve Jobs came up with this factor, he did not say, right, we have this new iPod that has this gigabytes of data, that has, cool scrolling techniques, that has, or this is the screen size. For somebody like me, I don't care. All I need access to songs. I don't care how your technology makes it work for me. Then the question is, how do you commute? But then when he said 1,000 songs, it's simple, it's concise, and that's like, wow, right? You just stop and think. Now, it doesn't have to be for these groundbreaking products. So as a corporate innovator, when you go and talk to your managers or others that are supposed to be blessing your idea, what makes them stop and say, wow, right? And you can see companies using it even now. If you see even taglines of companies, or even if Surf Excel, even companies like that, they'll say "Daag achhi hai." But the thing is, dirt is good, and that's like, wow, wait, why is dirt good? Because their detergent can take care of it, right? So that's the first thing, is you have to break assumptions of what is possible. That's the first thing. So that has, and we'll come to how this happens. So that's their first success of how do innovators break assumptions of what is possible. That takes us to the next question, is you can break assumptions of what is possible when you create value in unexpected ways. Okay, so if you go back to pre-Amazon days, right, we did not have free shipping. We did not have all the, now any company in the US that's starting, you just almost take shipping for free. And then Amazon then said, okay, you know what? Our consumers are interested in getting good quality products. They want low prices, and they want to get it as easily as possible and as quickly as possible. When they came up with Amazon Prime, they now, as of today, this is a more recent idea from Amazon, right, in the past 20 years. They now have about 150 million customers in 17 countries, and for an annual fee of $80, you get your Prime shipping, you get your Prime music, you get Prime video, you get a lot for the money that you pay for your annual subscriptions. And when Amazon said this, they did not ask, so I have this technology, how do I make it for customers? They started with, what does the customer want? How do I create value? And that's the same thing that you are doing as a corporate innovator. As you're coming up with your idea, who are my customers? They could be internal within the company. They could be external outside the company, but you have to show to your organization, how is this benefiting my customers? And I see this happening even now, especially mostly with those that are from a non-management background. If it's an engineer, or, again, I'm nothing against engineers, been married to one for 21 years. But I'm just saying that when you talk about this, they come from the perspective of, this is cool. This makes this shiny thing turn green. Nobody cares. You want to know why it affects the customers. And even if you look at successes of recent companies, if you think about like, Airbnb, their tagline is, book rooms with locals, not hotels. And wait, so that's a wow factor. How do I book, before it came, right? How do I book room with locals? And then they're telling you as a traveler, save money while traveling. If you're a host, they are telling you, make money by renting your house, and then learn the culture instead of going into a hotel that is very impersonal. So the success secret number 2 is you have to constantly think, how are you creating value in unexpected ways? And it then goes back to the first principle, which we talked about, which is the wow factor. So you create value and you talk about it in a way that just clicks with the person listening to it. So those are the two things. And of course, all this takes training and practice. Easy to say, but that's what you need to do. Now, the next question is, okay, so how do you start with this? Because if you think about it, let's say you are an innovator somewhere in the, let's say in the middle or bottom levels of the organization. People are not waiting to give you resources. People are not asking you, oh, how much money do you need? Or what resources do you want? All you have is an idea, your belief that the idea is going to happen, and then you need to somehow make it work. So how does that work? The next thing that the next, I say secret number 3, is you have to navigate organizational constraints. Now, navigating organizational constraints, those of us in management know that when you think about what are the different constraints when you go up and ask, there's no money, there's lack of financial resources. There's no time. We already have like 100 projects. We don't have time for your project. There's lack of time, lack of money, lack of human resources, right? Lack of software, technology, tools, buildings, you name it, anything that is considered a resource within an organization. And this is the interesting thing about corporate innovators. When you are an independent entrepreneur, you basically go with family and friends, right? You know people don't have access to those resources. Somehow people think in a large organization, you have access to these resources. That's not true. The organization has access to these resources. You as somebody within the organization have to figure out how you get access to those resources because they're not earmarked for you. So there's this challenge where there's abundance when you look outside, but then there is very little for you. So how do you navigate organizational constraints? One of the ways is, again, telling people is challenging how things work. So for example, one of my innovators in my study, he had this idea for launching something, right? It's a search engine, it was an improvement. And when he went and talked to his bosses, one of the things they said was, look, I don't think it's going to happen. It's going to take us about 8 or 9 months for this to happen. And then he says, no. I spoke informally to this person. I already got us in the slot. I can do this in about 9 weeks. And then people were like, wait, that's the constraint that we have. How did you make it work in 9 weeks? And then that's the success number 4, which is how are you going to access resources? Okay, so one of the challenges is when you are coming up with an idea, everybody wants resources. Okay, so one of the things I recommend innovators to do is, let's say you're using something that nobody wants, and then you have to tell everybody. So think about it from the perspective of a corporate manager. The organization has invested money in certain resources, and they are happy when you're able to get more value out of their investment. So if you're using something that something is wasting in the organization, then you tell everybody how smart you are and how you're able to leverage this. So for example, I'll tell you, this is another guy called Mike. He had this idea where, this is a big company with several divisions, and they had these different database tools in these different divisions. And the managers were they were just selling them because customers wanted, but they were not really interested in those products. So Mike had an idea. He said, if I could get these tools from different managers, I can make little changes, incremental changes to them, and I can create a business out of it. So he went to those managers. In fact, he called his project the K9 project. K9 is for dogs. And he said, oh, these are the dogs that nobody wants, right? He called it, and he was very specific in saying it. Look, you have all these tools and resources. You have all these tools. You don't care about them. I need them. Can I have them from you? And the managers were like, fine, you can take them, you can do what you want, because they want to prioritize on what their focus was. So he took them and he built something around it as a very successful business. But then he made sure he told everybody that, look, these are the resources nobody wants. I have been able to use them and I got value out of it. So then everyone's happy to hear about this. That's why you see when you talk about how, right? So this is kind of when you're using wasting resources. But the secret to success number 5 is when you are asking for resources that everybody wants, then you tell no one, right? If you're asking for money, everybody wants money, right? Or if you're asking for paying vendors, everybody needs that money to pay vendors. So you tell nobody when you want resources that everybody wants. So I can tell you that in one of the other organizations that I went and talked to, to one of the very successful innovators, one of the things they had was he wanted some parts from machine shops. And his vice president explicitly said, look, our company does not have the resources or the competencies to engage in this. You should not be doing it. clearly, being a true entrepreneur, he did not listen, right? So he went and talked to these vendors from these different companies and said, look, if you can, I will actually, this is a purchase requisition. I will get it approved after. Can you informally loan me some of this stuff? Now, but he did not tell anybody, including his manager, that, that I'm going to go and ask for this resource, because he knows the minute he puts a regular purchase requisition, it's going to be stopped. So what I found was the innovators, when they had ideas and they needed resources for something that everybody wanted, they did not keep anybody appraised of this. They did not ask for permission. They just went ahead and did it. And this is where you see, lots of advice like don't tell anybody, or don't take, ask for forgiveness, not permission. All that comes from this. But that is bad advice when you're actually doing something creative with wasting assets, right? In secret number 4. So you have to depend on what kind of resources am I asking? Should I tell everybody or should I not? So that's kind of one of the 5th secret of success. The next one, when you think about the secret, is learn storytelling. This is really important. And this is a thread that goes through everything. Even when you talk about the wow factor in number 1, there is something to how do you reframe innovations? And I'll tell you why. And it's kind of interesting because I teach classes in both strategic management as well as innovation. And in the class on strategic management, the entire emphasis is on a company's core competencies. As we all know, it is, what do you do better than everybody else? How do you keep doing it better than everybody else? Which means focus on the path that you're going and keep going at it completely, right? And that's the one set. In the innovation class, what I teach is completely orthogonal to that. What I talk about is don't do what they're doing, shift direction, right? So that's why you see there's this, and I hold it this way because it's the exact opposite of what the company has been doing. This is why innovation is hard. So your challenge as an innovator is how are you going to reframe your innovation to fit the organization? Now, I've seen that in lots of times innovators fail because they go in, and even in the best of companies, right? When they go in and say something that is so different from the organization does, it is scary because you don't know if it's going to succeed, and people don't see why their company should be doing it, and rightly so. Because you as a company, you are trained and you have your assets in a particular direction. Then your challenge as an innovator is how do you make this connection between what you're doing and what's already existing in the company? And sometimes innovators came up with stories that are just like, sometimes it even makes sense, but it made sense to those managers. So for example, in one of my companies, which is a very well-known world's leading printer company, this person had an innovation that had to do with videos, right? How do you make higher quality video conferencing? And the challenge with that is this company and their manager, when I say manager, I just mean the organization in general. They said, look, we don't have the competencies to do that. We are a printing company. Why do you ask us to do something that's different? So he said, look, we are a printing company. We print pixels on paper. All I'm asking you to do is to print pixels on screen, okay? It seems like the same thing, it's not. But the managers were like, oh wait, maybe it does connect. So what's the challenge here? People somehow think that when you go in as an innovator, people look at the core products of a company and think that the core products are very similar to what the company does. The core products are not what the company does. What the company does are the core competencies of the company that can be reconfigured to do something different. So for example, if you think about it in latest COVID times, the companies that have been making ventilators are the car companies. Ford and GM and Tesla, all these companies said, we'll start making ventilators during COVID because we can do it. And the first question is, what does the car company know about making ventilators? Because those are completely different products. But some of the competencies that help car companies, car manufacturers do this is one is cars are also ventilators are really complex to make. Cars are complex to make. And the thing is lots of knowledge and planning and coordination and logistics. And there's different, embedding of different things that happens in car manufacturing. And those competencies were translated with a little bit of difficulty, and I would say maybe a lot of difficulty, but they were able to make that. Moreover, the car companies had, the car manufacturers, right? They have access to a supply base, whether it's, whether it's plastic or metals or whatever it is. They were able to have these vendor contracts. So they were able to leverage their contracts. They were able to leverage their competencies in car manufacturing and turn that over into making ventilators, right? So if you think about it, at the surface, ventilators and cars have nothing to do with each other. But deep down, so you as an innovator, your task is to figure out, look beyond what the product is, look beyond what your managers say and say, okay, what is the, because again, if you're in that company, you're thinking of something that the company does. That's where you're coming up with this idea, right? So how do I leverage the muscle of my organization to go ahead and narrate my story and reframe the innovations to fit the organization? So that's the next secret that we are talking about, is how do you make that transition? The seventh secret, again, people always talk about this, and you will see as an innovator, you are going to have more rejections than anybody else, because you are going to say, you're going to hear 1,000 reasons why it's not going to work. And this is the whole notion of resilience. So if you think about resilience, if you ask psychologists, the resilience, they define it as a process of adapting in the face of adversity or trauma, tragedy. How do you come across it? So that's like, really, it's bouncing back. It's how do you bounce back with better personal growth? And so it involves aspects of grit and courage and commitment, all those things. Now, if you when you talk to innovators, you will hear that. So what do they do in this? It's almost like trying to gain. So one of my innovators told me, when you see something in the bull's eye, it could be that you threw the dart in the bull's eye, but it also could be that you first find you first throw the dart and then draw circles around the bull's eye, right? So the final outcome looks the same. And the reason this is important is when people are rejecting your ideas in your company, they typically also give you feedback on why it's not going to work. And I would tell innovators, instead of getting upset, which is normal human tendency to get upset when people say your idea is no good, is to how do you incorporate it and how do you start speaking the language that your bosses are going to understand, your supervisors are going to understand, and how do you convince them? You have to speak their language to get them to understand you, because it's not their job. Because one of the things that is frustrating for innovators is when you look at books on organizational culture and innovation management, all of that is important. I am not denying that. But when the onus is on the managers to create responsibility and take care of innovation, then you have no power as an individual. So my job is, how do I empower individuals who don't have that power to make it happen? So and from that perspective, I'll tell you that, it's not your manager's job to try and understand what you're saying. It's your job to speak the language that they can understand so that they can support you. And once you're able to, and this happens even in change management, right? Once you convert a few people, the rest of them, join the bandwagon. It's only the initial steps are difficult. And of course, as you scale up and become more successful, you'll have more corporate antibodies coming and attacking your innovation. So there's different stages of doing this. But having said that, the resilience and how you're able to incorporate feedback is really important in how you go about with innovation. So I want to kind of go with the last principle and open it up for questions, which is, if you think about the secret, the last one is the word entrepreneur itself has the 3 R's. And if you think about the 3 R's, they actually encompass the other things that we just said, right? The first is what's called as resourcing, because as an entrepreneur, regardless of whatever context you work in, you need access to resources. And what is resourcing? And this is an area that I'm working on. And it's very interesting. You have an asset, right? Let's say you have a book. Whether you use a book for reading and understanding and gaining knowledge, or whether you use it as a paperweight to keep it on top of other books, depends on what you're doing with that. So when you're not reading a book, you're just leaving it on, keeping some papers from not flying, you're using it as a paperweight. So a book is not a book unless you're actually using the schema of, and this goes into schema and action and all those things. So even the example I just gave you of the wasting assets, Mike changed the schema of what those tools were. From wasting tools, he saw potential into turning this into a business. So that is the act of resourcing. You're using an asset into a way that it was not originally intended. Sometimes I mean, there are other words that are used like bricolage, right? So you have all those things. How do you change what an asset does to make it work for you? That's the first R of entrepreneurship, which is resourcing, because I can guarantee you, you will seldom have access to all the resources you need. In fact, one of the traditional definitions of entrepreneur is someone who pursues value and opportunities regardless of the constraints, and especially the constraints out of resources. So resourcing is a very important skill for you as an entrepreneur. The next thing is reframing, and whether it's reframing to fit the innovation, and you have to be a good storyteller. You have to be a good storyteller to say, because why, again, even if you're starting your own company, it's not up to the customer to try and use your product. You know, most of us, when you look at these new apps or new inventions, you use it once. If it doesn't work, we're not interested. So, you know, you need to make sure that, you know, how do you reframe it for the customer? How do you tell a good story? That's the second R of being a successful entrepreneur. And the third R is of resilience, because is how do you use the feedback you get and bounce back from the rejections and everything that you face in order to succeed. So that sort of summarizes my 8 principles. And just to repeat them, you know, break assumptions of what's possible. That's a wow factor I talked about. The next is, how do you create value in unexpected ways? And that is tied back to the wow factor. How do you violate assumptions of organizational constraints, telling people that this is not the way? And how do you convince that? Tell everybody when you're using resources that is wasting, and tell nobody when you want resources that everybody wants. And again, this is not like blanket principles. The answer, as in most management, is it depends. But these are some of the principles you can think about as you're thinking through this. Learn storytelling. If you think about it, the things that we remember from our childhood are the stories we heard. Storytelling is a really important skill. So how do you reframe innovations to fit what's going on? Resilience is a try again. And finally, always remember that the whole story of entrepreneurship is in the 3 R's of resourcing, reframing, and resilience. So with that, I'm going to stop share and open it up for questions.
Well, thank you so much, Priya. That was very, very inspiring. And I would say it was almost like you were firing bullet point after the other with so much precision based on the wonderful research that you have done and the ability to not only interact with so many people as part of your research, but compile the whole thing so very effectively. Thank you so much. It was indeed a delight listening to you. And as they rightly say, you gave us so many new perspectives, and at the same time, reinforce so many perspectives that Professor Ranjan Das had stated in his earlier presentation. And since both of you were almost independently sharing certain views, it gave us an idea of what are the core common factors when we talk about innovation. Thank you so much once again. There are lots of questions coming up, and I'm going to share some of them with you. One of the first things that has already come up as a question is, do you see approaches to innovation different, let us say, in India and the East and the West? What are your views?
So that's a great question. In fact, my master's thesis was on how corporate innovation differs in different, 17 different countries. Because as we all know, and we did use cultural values, right? So for example, you have cultural values, you have national values, you have company values, and then you have, very core department values. So I will tell you that in more hierarchical cultures and in more collective cultures, so I think some of the things that happened in the US cannot happen in India. For example, like I said, this person went and talked to those vendors and got purchase requisitions absolutely without telling the manager. And then the manager was like, look, it's a good idea, let's do it. In the hierarchical culture, that is likely to backfire. Okay, if you don't have that equation with your manager. But again, in India also, as we know, it's been changing. The culture, the corporate culture has been changing the past few years. So yes, the answer is yes, there is a cultural difference. But I would say that the company culture is probably more, it influences you more as an innovator rather than, for example, let's say the same thing happened. This person, his immediate boss did not like it. I've known people that go and talk to others as corporate sponsors who can help them with it. or someone who can influence their manager in saying yes or having a conversation. So the steps are different in terms of how do you get the buy-in? So that's where the cultural difference comes in mostly, but not in terms of in terms of that being only because it's a difference between India versus US versus Australia. This is more to do with the company culture, and every company is different in that.
And when you talk about culture, could you share some experiences on how easy or difficult it is to change culture, especially when you have multi-generational workforces in today's environment?
It's really difficult. So I can tell you that when you talk, that's why there are different things we can change. So if you think about an organization, right, there are 3 levels in which, why do we have a culture? We have a culture to make sure that everybody behaves in a particular way so the organization can realize its vision and mission, right? That's the definition of why we have this. So organizations have 3 layers of control if you think about it. One is the typical control, which is performance evaluation systems, reviews, and feedback, and telling people, you're doing this good, this is not good, so take care of it, right? That's the first level of control. The second is in terms of organizational structure. You have access to these resources. This is who you're reporting to. This is who reports to you. So try to make it work within that. So that's a formal structure. Organizational culture is basically an informal structure that makes sure that people can march in the same direction. That's what it is. Now, when you have a multi-directional workforce, and it's getting increasingly difficult, you're having different viewpoints, you're having different values, you're having different priorities. And the question is, where is the conflict coming from? And the reason this comes in culture is it's a conflict, right? And one of the things is, if it's a conflict in difference in goals, that's different. You can work through, you can talk through if it's a conflict of the process, great. You want to go route A, I want to go route B, we'll figure out a way to make it work. So that if the goal is common, the process can be managed, it's easier to do that. If the goals are different, that becomes a little bit more difficult. It's like, okay, do we pursue your goal or mine? Is there a win-win? So that's a different kind of conflict in terms of culture. But if there's an absolute difference in values, I don't value like what you bring in, not value as a person, but your values as what is important for our organization. So let us say, I'm a Gen Z, or they're just entering the workforce, right? So they're like, this is what we do. It's on Instagram. I'm just going to go ahead and do it. And then you have someone who is a baby boomer who is still there trying to figure out, wait, this makes no sense. So that's going to happen. And from what you can see, so then that becomes a difference in what is important values. That's the hardest to reconcile, whether it's companies or families or whatever it is, right? And there, I think a lot of companies are looking at, reverse mentoring or, and again, goes back to communication and reframing on what's important. And again, the storytelling and communication is what's going to happen. And culture change, and no matter what no matter what anybody tells you, has to come from the top. If it's good, middle managers are really important to make this happen, to implement the change. But no matter how it is, and even as a consultant, I will not take any assignment until the top management has buy-in into it. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. It's not going to happen. So the top management has to have that buy-in, and it's a middle manager's role to somehow have these dialogues to make that culture change.
All right, I think what you're re-emphasizing, it starts at the top, but unless it percolates down step by step across the whole organization, we might end up facing some bottlenecks in the implementation process. I'm so glad to note one thing. You mentioned so much about the importance of storytelling in this entire approach to leading innovation. And though I'm jumping the gun a little, I'd like to share with all of us present here that next Friday, our Friday Fundamentals webinar is on business storytelling. That's the topic of the webinar next Friday. So you can block your diaries right away, when in the meantime, you will get more details of the same. But I couldn't resist sharing this because Priya made a very, very emphatic point over there.
Absolutely.
Our next question, Priya, is based on your experience with corporations, say over the last 10 years, what percentage of companies do you think are really innovative? Are we just blowing the trumpet, or are they really innovative? What have been your experiences?
So I don't have an empirical percentage numbers. And so so I can't just say this is innovative. The problem with innovation is how do you even define it? Because so this is one of the questions I had in my research study is, if you went to a company like, let's say, Google or HP, one of those larger companies, it has to be a huge world-changing innovation for this to be considered. But then in smaller companies in different contexts, even a process improvement would count as an innovation because it's making you do something better. So the question of what percentage of companies do it is dependent on what you define as innovation, right? So, and I do know it's similar to greenwashing and pinkwashing, which is like, and everybody says they are green and sustainable. Everybody's like, we believe in gender and diversity and all that stuff. So you have all this, companies that say that care about more, that they care about innovation is way more than companies that actually do. And even companies that do not face issues in implementing it. But to be honest, that's my facetious comment is that's why we all have jobs, right? If they all knew how to do it, right, we'd be out of jobs. So you continue talking and so that's a hard question to answer. But I can say that people more and more are at least realizing, or companies are realizing, that innovation is really important. And there's no choice. And especially with COVID, I think it's pushed us a decade. You have to be in the future. And you can see that even those of us in education, I remember even from personal experience, back in the days, if you just told faculty we have to teach online classes, this was like, wait, why? It's a very different, now it's like we're all doing it. So we've been pushed 10 years into the future. So I think with COVID, when we come out of this, companies will be more willing to look at it because who knows what's going to change.
Right, as you correctly pointed out, sometimes crisis forces the pace of innovation. And I think that's exactly what's happened to all of us out here at this given point in time. The next question is from one professor to another. I have with us here Dr. Veni Nair, who is from the ITM Business School, and she herself is a pioneer in innovation and does a lot of work with the students and faculty. Over to you, Veni, for your question. Just unmute and speak.
Yeah, thank you, sir. And it was such a nice listen to Rangapriya. And I was very impressed with the three R's that you said about entrepreneur. I'm sure all my students who are here will always remember the three R's, which is very right, which you pointed out. So my question to you is, so whatever we have been discussing is that innovations are always good, right? It's welcome in almost all companies, all sectors. But still they fail, right? There are innovations that fail too, right? We know Google examples. We know a lot of companies where innovations fail. So what, according to you, what is the primary reason innovations fail?
Thank you, Dr. Veni. That's a great question. And, and one of the things I will say is, when we talked about it, remember I said, we are talking about innovators that are coming from middle to how do you launch your innovation? Now, once you launch it, there's a difference. So if you think about the innovation process itself, there are three processes, right? So one is the ideation stage, is I have an idea, how do I go about doing it? The next is the incubation stage, is how do I get the resources? How do I grow this? And the third is the scale up stage, right? So, and the reason I'm bringing this out is I'm trying to help innovators that come from ideation to incubation to at least show like a working proof of what's going on. But companies in which, if you're the organization, once you come to a point where customers are interested, you are interested, you have enough of you have enough of critical mass believing in that innovation, that's the time when the organization has to put in more resources to scale up the innovation and provide the infrastructure for it to scale up. Now, in companies where that doesn't happen, this innovation is not going to succeed. So at the scale up stage, and once you get there, that's when the politicking starts, because once it's successful, everybody wants to own it, or nobody wants to own it. So that becomes, it's a very different political battle how that happens. But the short answer is, unless the organizational competencies can be reconfigured to support the innovation, it's really hard to succeed, right? So the next question is, that's the next phase of the innovation process. So the stuff that I told you gets you, like I said, my heart is with these independent innovators who are trying to push. So it's how do you get from nothing, an idea in your head, to the incubation stage? At this stage, again, going back to my first response to Professor Mani's question, is now you need to get corporate sponsors, you need to get executives, you need to get the top management heavyweight team to support your innovation. That is when it's going to happen. I would love to think, you can go against the grain and do it. You may, but that's like 1 in a million. It's really hard to do. So that's why, again, the storytelling. So do attend the next week's session. The storytelling, the convincing people, that is really important to get buy-in. And we cover a lot of that in the change management class, because if you think about it, innovation is about how do you bring about organizational change.
All right, that's great. Another interesting dimension is that failed innovation is always a stepping stone to learn and go one step further in the innovation process. But do tell us how to cope. Tell us how to cope with failure. Yeah, I was saying that failed innovation. You wanted to say something. Go ahead.
No, I realized I didn't answer the
question which said failed innovation. You can complete the answer to Veni's question, then I will shoot the next one. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add that, I did not answer about failure. So one thing I've seen, Dr. Veni, is that in companies, when innovations fail, that one happens, it doesn't just go away like that. So what people are able to do, the smart innovators, dismantle the innovation and use parts of it in other things. So that's the other way in which failure. So it's not like it's done, it's a product. And it's, again, I think innovators that are successful are really astute in knowing how to decouple things, right? We just talked about decoupling products from competencies. And even innovations, it's how do you decouple parts of the innovations? They can use one for one and one for the other. So that's the other way in which that goes. And Professor Mani, you asked, I think your follow-up was, how do you deal with failures? Is that as an innovator, you're asking, how do you deal with failures?
All right, the perspective was when something we tried new fails, we can always say this is a stepping stone to learn how to cope with that and continue to innovate. But there's a huge psychological pressure when one fails. So how does one cope up with this scenario?
That's a great question. And I think, there's also this cultural element, and I will say it here very bluntly, it's like where failure is a badge of honor, that doesn't work like that. When you fail, it just feels horrible, right? And, and it's not in every place is not Silicon Valley, where it's like, hey, and even in Silicon Valley, if you're going to have 3 failed startups, no one's going to give you money, right? So there is definitely something to be said about failure, but there's also this thing as you have to show success. So one of the things I will say is, even if your innovation fails, and again, it goes back to networks and relationships. That's what I would say. It's when someone gives you feedback saying that, look, this is not going to work. I think a part of that's an opportunity for you as an innovator to build that relationship to say, okay, this is not working, I get it. What would you like to see in it? Where do you think I should go next? And again, remember, Professor Mani, even we as academics, right? When you're trying something new, you get papers, you get rejected all the time. And I think there's a statistic that academics face more rejections or probably as many rejections as movie stars, right? So it's just one of those things. We're in a profession defined by failure. So I think it's one of those things where the relationship is important to answer to you. Nobody wants to, and a lot of people don't want to deal with people that are bitter and complaining and saying, everything is horrible, I'm not going to do it. So, and there's something to be said about attitude. And there's something to be said, and it's very hard, I'm not denying it, but that's your private venting session with your family and friends. When you're going back to the person that is giving you feedback, when you're going back to a resource provider, is asking, okay, you didn't like this about me, how do I make this better? What are some of the suggestions that you have to make it better? Let's say they say they're not interested in helping you. Is there somebody else who might help? Is there somebody else? So the thing is, you have to use even the failures or something. It's again about the human connection. Is what are the human connections I can make? And it's not about networking as in what do I get out of you tomorrow? It's about how can I assist you and how can you assist me so that we can build this. And those are the people. So you get into a different cycle or a circle of people that know, and your reputation and networks matter in that context.
Absolutely. I think the power of synergy would really go a very long way in fostering this innovation and innovative spirit that you were talking about. Our next question is from Mr. RSR Murthy, who's a chartered accountant and also a member of our executive committee of the Bombay Management Association. Over to you, Azhar.
Yeah, good evening, Dr. Priya. It has been a very interesting session. I was actually reflecting on my own experience. I mean, I carry about 36 years of corporate experience. I worked for about 8 companies in different industries, manufacturing and services. The last 3 years, I'm in the consulting space. So what I was thinking is that probably in all the companies that I have worked at or that I'm interacting with, the level of innovation is quite insignificant. I mean, I have, you were mentioning about process innovation, product innovation, etc. I have an example of a public sector company where the particular boss, you know, he has introduced process changes, which I think truly qualify to be an innovation. Okay. And similarly, in a manufacturing chemicals company, which was highly research focused, I definitely think they were innovative in the sense that they were offering better and better products to the pharma industry. But there are even more examples of the places I work where they have been extremely static in their thinking. Mm-hmm. Today, even in the context of my clients, some of them have a grand vision. They want to take India to the world, which requires a lot of innovation. That's very praiseworthy. But somewhere I feel that these guys are also lost on how to do that over 3 years, 5 years, whatever. So, and of course, there are others who are highly static in their mindsets. I'm sorry for this long introduction to my question because it needed a context. Mm-hmm. So my question is, I think there are a number of organizations out there who are not innovative enough and are certainly paying a price. Mm-hmm. So what do you think? What should organizations do? Not just from the perspective of an innovator, from the perspective of an organization. What should organizations do? I mean, if you could throw some light based on your experience and research.
Thank you, Mr. Murthy. And I'll tell you, the context was really helpful. So it is not a long-winded question. The context is helpful in understanding. So if I could break your question down into 2 parts. The first is you're asking, if companies are static, how do we get them to be innovative?
Yes.
So the question I would throw back at you is, as you know, as we all know, getting people to change is really difficult. And one of the things is we should not be innovating for the sake of innovating, right? So the company somehow is in a position where it feels like it doesn't need to innovate. They're doing really well. And I can't think of a sector, but maybe they're just so good at it, they're a monopoly and they don't care, right? That's the only company that I think can do fine without innovation because there is no competition. Maybe it's a local company where it's no competition, so they don't care. So the point is, we don't want innovation just for the sake of innovating because life is hard enough to do it. And innovation, if you think about it, is people say the analogy is trying to fly a plane when trying to repair it at the same time. So that's a very different thing. But the other extreme you mentioned are companies that are trying to get India, that's why I'm interested. And that's why I work with companies, especially in India and other emerging economies. The reason, because I think that's where we have the most potential. Again, in terms of whether it's India, I've been to Colombia as well in Barranquilla. So the problem is here is the companies or even individual entrepreneurs is access to capital. They have so many infrastructural gaps. It's so difficult to innovate. But these are the companies that are going to change the world in the future. So for those companies that have the passion and that don't have the know-how on innovation, right? So you talk about, then we get back into who's the customer? What are you innovating? So that is a series of who was your customer? What are you innovating? What's your target market? So you go back into that. And then how are your competencies either hindering or engaging with that, right? So that's kind of the whole innovation consulting framework starts, and that's not a conversation in an hour, right? But then it is very companies that can be helped. We can certainly help those companies in, there are books, I'm happy to give references. There are ways to do it. But if a company has absolutely no need to innovate and they're not interested, and if it's in a sector where they're going to perish, that's different. Then we can tell them, look, if you don't innovate, you're going to perish. You better do it. So those companies need, and as we all know, I think the biggest cost of introducing anything new is creating awareness. So I would break your question into 3 parts. Companies that don't care and are going to be successful because they're monopolies, they don't have to innovate for the sake of innovating. Let them be, let them do what they want. Companies that are in a space where they still don't realize that they need to innovate will be out of business in the next few years. Then there's creating an awareness of why innovation is important for organizational growth and survival. And this is about showing them the competition, how their market share is being taken away, or why their employees would lose jobs. So you motivate them by fear of what's going to happen if they still want to survive as a company. But for companies that have the intent but don't have the resources, you don't have to build awareness. It's more like, how do you have qualified people such as you, and now helping them out in what the innovation management framework looks like and where they need to start. So it's 3 different answers depending on it.
Yeah, my question, of course, relates to category 2 and category 3. And I said I'm speaking from experience. And at least I can speak of 2 companies which have not innovated in the right time. While they're not completely out of business, the fact is that they have slowed down. It had its impact. So that's the category that I was speaking. And the third is a little more interesting because that is more contemporary requirement from my point of view as a consultant. The younger generation entrepreneurs who have fantastic ideas, who really want to do great. As I said, they want to take India to the world. That's the level size of their vision. The question is, I'm still not very convinced of how these guys are going to do. And I don't see that specificity. Maybe I'm getting influenced by my finance background because I certainly need to look at specificity, which I don't see. And of course, if the time is not too short, I would love to hear from you what we as a consultant can do to these fellows. They know what they have to be innovative. But how do we put on the path of innovation in terms of culture or in terms of initiatives that they should take?
Thank you for bringing that up. No, I think one of the things is founders, as we know, are really good at founding and coming up with new ideas, but they're not great at, and that can be trained. That's a trainable skill, because running company and founding a company are 2 different skill sets. So once we have founders having the stuff that you talked about, they have, if it's a problem with the business model, if it's a problem with the revenue model, those are things you can have external people to help out. But if it's a problem with leadership, team building, culture, that's a different set of managerial skills that they need. And, I'm certainly happy to, have a conversation about that. So.
Okay.
Priya, there are some people who wish to connect with you at a later point in time. I have suggested to them that they can reach you through LinkedIn. And I'm taking the liberty of sharing with all of them on your behalf that if you tell them that they attended the BMA session, Priya will be happy to connect with you. So yes, that's absolutely. Just in lighter way. The next question that comes up, Priya, is there actually any difference between individual resilience and corporate resilience?
Yes. The answer is yes. There is a difference. And again, it's how do corporations come back from what, it's the same kind of definition. When you have a setback, how do you come back? And resilience in that aspect has to be a part of your core cultural value. And it ties into very much, is resilience a part of your organization's culture? And that goes back to the original question, one of the questions Dr. Veni asked in terms of failures, is what is the process within your organization of bouncing back? Is it a stigma? Let's say you fail. It's how do people train you within the organization? And as much as I say, there's a lot of fluff around, oh, failure is a badge of honor. That's not true, right? But at the same time, is how does your organization, if you fail in a project, let's say you have an innovator who is failing in a project and you throw them into, you demote them and you throw them there, the next person is not going to innovate within your company. Similarly, when companies fail or they're stigmatized, bad things happen all the time, is how are they able to kind of overcome that, the damage, the reputation, the cost, the financial and the non-financial costs, and coming back. I think that should be ingrained within the culture of an organization to make that happen. And Professor Mani, I know it's probably my TISS training, right? The answer lies in the people.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I guess what we often try to practice, though very difficult, is people should learn to accept that failure is an event, not a person. In our system, there is a huge stigma about failure because people attach a lot of emotions to it. Whereas if we look at failure as an event, I guess some part of it is automatically taken care of and the resilience sets in. Right. I'm going to request Professor Ravi Dhingra, who's been with us and patiently listening and being part of the whole discussion. Professor Dhingra, you also have a lot of experience in dealing with the university system as well as a lot of corporates. Your views would be most useful at this given point in time. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Mani, and thank you, Professor Kannan. I can, listening to you for the last hour or so, I can understand now why you were nominated and judged to be the, one of the best business educators. Your perspectives on strategy and innovation, I really enjoyed. And they were very thought-provoking, and the way you explained them and how eloquently you simplified some of these concepts made it look all very simple. In fact, I'm going to plagiarize and take some of this into my own teaching. I will share that I got them through your session. But thank you very much. You really clarified and simplified some very difficult concepts, and all in the space of 60 minutes. I'm very impressed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Dhingra. It's very kind of you, and I appreciate it. I would love to have a conversation. Again, I'm trying to connect with people that are interested in innovation and in this space. I would love to connect with you.
Yes, I will get your email from Professor Mani, and we shall connect even though we're on different time zones.
Nevertheless, I guess as they used to say many, many years ago, there was this advertisement of HMT watches, which said, if you have the inclination, we have the time. So, and I'm sure that, all of us in this room will make that extra effort to connect despite time zones and what we may, because technology has been a huge enabler. In lighter vein, it required Bombay Management Association to connect a Professor Ravi Dhingra and a Professor Rangapriya Kannan, both of them in the United States of America. So I guess.
Yes, thank you. I also wanted to mention as trivia that my last physical meeting, I cannot remember which auditorium it was that BMA would hold its sessions, but my last session that I attended of the BMA was in 1970. So thank you for 50 years later for helping us bring us all together virtually. And I didn't even have to get on a plane. That's the best part.
So it's a kind of a golden jubilee celebration.
Yes,
I'm handing over to Mr. Ernest Fernandez. He had a question to ask. Please go ahead, Mr. Fernandez.
Professor Kannan, I was just wondering that innovation, would it help if you have an innovation cell in an organization rather than individual managers pushing their ideas to their bosses?
Absolutely, yes. So what would the innovation, the question is, the answer is absolutely yes. And the question is, what would this innovation cell do? So one of the things is having this innovation cell is important because, again, all these people have ideas, but a lot of people do not know how to go about promoting it. So what would the innovation cell do? If it's going to provide training and education and infrastructure for innovations to happen through the organization, that's a good thing to have. If they're able to find some kind of resources to kickstart the process, that is really helpful. And in fact, if you look at what, a lot of companies do, innovation hackathons and all that through the innovation cell. And the other thing is also, it helps these people that are interested come together, form those teams. And I think that's really important. What the innovations, and the other thing is once you establish an innovation cell within an organization, that also shows a top management commitment to pushing innovation. So if you think even about theoretically in terms of organizational innovation, it says that the top management has to set up the structure for innovation, right? So this would be a part of organizational structure. The worst thing that could happen is if the structure becomes the naysayer, basically saying that, these are the things that I need and everything else is not. So the question is, how do you create an innovation cell that is conducive and encouraging for people to innovate rather than, hinder innovation? And how do you provide the awareness, the infrastructure, and the resources for individuals to make it happen. And that, again, has to come from the corporate level.
All right, that's interesting. I'm handing over for the next question to Professor Satish Chandra. Go ahead, Satish, your question.
Good evening, ma'am. It's very nice to hear from you. Very meaningful insights, and you have given an excellent delivery. I have two questions, ma'am, if you bear with me. So like, as we talk about like disruptive innovation, when Kodak was not able to adopt the digital technology, it was out of the market. And Apple last decade, and now Tesla, LXC, Tata LXC, these all are, so when we observe, most of these are becoming technology based only. Is there any chance, or is there any way where disruptive innovation can be without technology? That is the one question. If you don't mind, I will give the second question also. How companies handle these core competencies? What are the core competencies where companies need to inculcate to get this innovative, sustainable innovation? Because innovations mostly fails. That's known. Every idea cannot be a success. Then how to make it sustainable?
Great questions, Professor Chandra. So let me go with the first one, right? So does disruption happen? So I'm going to answer it in two different ways. So if you read Peter Thiel's 0 to 1, right, the book, right? So you certainly need technology for disruptive innovation to happen, right? On the other hand, do countries like us, like in India, do we need disruptive innovations all the time? Right? So can you use existing technologies and create business models about, some of the innovation that's happening? And, and now there's actually a recent, and if you actually go back, HBR now has a case. This is by the people that wrote the Blue Ocean Strategy, Renee Moborn and Kim, right? So they have now, all of us, I'm going to just go to Bollywood for a minute. All of us saw the movie Padman, right? I don't know if all of us saw it. Some of us saw it. Right? That is actually, it's not, what did it disrupt? It disrupted nothing, right? There were no, female hygiene products. There were accessibility in that sector. This just came. So it's not a disruptive innovation, but so they call it non-disruptive creation, which is really important. So the reason I bring that up is there's a lot of, and the reason I even teach the class, so I taught this in a class called Corporate Innovation and Emerging Economies, and Professor Dhingra would probably realize the kind of feel the impact when you teach. There's a lot of things on disruptive innovations and things happening in the next Google. We don't need the next Google. We can have it. There's no reason you shouldn't have. We should have it. But the question is, there's so much more potential in countries like ours where you can use non-disruptive creation to happen. And the technology doesn't have to be something putting a man on Mars. It has to be about how do you use the existing resources, again, back with the resourcing, to use something that is useful, to make something that is useful to people that actually feel the pinch and the need. And so if you look at it, and if you actually go back and refer, that case study is written really well in terms of how, and I also made students watch Padman movie and discuss in class. So to get away from this notion of disruptive technology to non-disruptive creation, which is really important. So that's the first half in answering. And the answer is yes, a lot of disruptive technology happens. Disruption happens because of technology. So that's the one. The second question you asked was about core competencies, right? And what are the core competencies? So we've covered some of the stuff in terms of culture, but again, if you think about it, the fact about, and you've probably heard this before, right? Some companies say I need 25% of my revenues from innovative products every 5 years, something like that. So it has to be anything. People only, it's a great article actually back in the 70s. It's the folly of rewarding, I think it's the folly of rewarding B while hoping for A, or the other way around. Which you're rewarding something else and you are measuring something else. That's not going to happen. So the idea is you need to create competencies. If you think about Apple, think about Amazon, think about Netflix, think all these companies that have transitioned, the business models kept changing over time. And that's how innovation happens. It's a competency that has to be developed within the company saying, and that goes back to Mr. Murthy's question from a little while ago, is once the companies feel the need that we have to innovate or perish, then they're going to start having innovation as a core competency of the company, which means new skills, retraining, having the control systems, the structure and the culture geared around innovation. And that's how that's going to happen.
Okay, Priya, you almost answered this question, but I'd like to highlight this bit to you. There is one very strong school of thought which says, innovate or perish.
Mm-hmm.
And you rightly made a point during your presentation that don't innovate for the sake of innovating. So how does one actually determine what is the tipping point? When does one really need to innovate? How does one discover this? Is it magic? Is it some kind of a continuous effort by the top management of the company? Your views, please.
That's a great question. So yeah, so those are two things, right? Don't innovate for the sake of innovating, or you innovate or perish. Those are the two different contrasts. So one of the things is we have to look as a strategy professor. I think the first thing is we have to look at the external environment, and if the external environment is changing, and as Professor Satish said, like Kodak, that's one of the key failures is if the external environment is changing, you don't have a choice but to adapt, right? So that's a key thing. What is happening in the external environment? What's happening with everything we talk about in classes? What's happening with the technological environment? What's happening with the social cultural changes? So keeping a radar out is really important. The next thing is we cannot just trust the top management of, or not, the trust is the wrong word. We cannot just expect the top management of the company to be the ones that have the onus of innovation. So successful companies, that's why, going back to Professor Fernandez's question, is in terms of what are the infrastructure you have to even get these ideas? Do you have seers in your organization who are saying, because people the collective intelligence of people in your organization is much higher than just the people at the top. The question is, how do you tap into the collective intelligence of not just your organ now with the crowdfunding, the crowdsourcing kind of thing? It is not just the collective intelligence of your organizational members. It's also the collective intelligence of your vendors, your suppliers, your partners, your customers. They will all give you feedback on what are the changes that are coming and how you're not catching up. And the challenge for you as a company is how are you going to hear those and hear that carefully? And that's extremely important to know. If you're getting a consistent message, or even if it's inconsistent, if you're getting a message that your organization is not doing what it takes in terms of from these different groups, from your own employees, and you're also hearing it from all these other groups I said, that means you need to change. And again, I think one of the assumptions we have is that the top management, because the top management, right? They have a view of the company that no one does. But I think that has to be questioned a little bit. Because innovation must happen top down. Like I said, if innovation is not, if the company is not interested, innovation is not going to happen. But the collective intelligence doesn't have to be just of the top management. It could be of everybody, and it should be of everybody, especially with the open innovation kind of thing. And that'll give you clues as to where you're failing as a company and where we need to pick up and move on.
All right, there are lots of questions, but I guess we respect everybody's time, and that's been an integral part of our BMA culture. I'm going to take the liberty of asking one last question to you, Priya, before we come to a pause to this learning process, because I believe we can still continue to interact with you and continue the learning journey with so many of us who have connected with each other today. Would you suggest that innovation should be indoctrinated as a culture right from schools and colleges? Perhaps this doesn't happen enough. Your views, please.
I absolutely agree. I think the entrepreneurial mindset has to be, which is again, what is an entrepreneurial mindset, right? It's dealing with ambiguity, it's dealing with risk, it's how do you, and how do you, in face of change, how do you do it? And especially when I see students right now, one thing I do tell them is nobody's gonna hire you anymore if you go and ask employers, tell me what you want me to do, I'll do it. They don't need you. In the next few years, you'll have robots doing it. They need people who can think outside the box, who can answer these things. So absolutely, yes, the entrepreneurial mindset is what's going to differentiate you in the job market. And that has to happen from the time you start, because children have it naturally. When you're 3 years old, you're not looking at anything, you're just doing whatever you want. Somehow we, unfortunately, in the education system all over the world, have found a way to stifle that entrepreneurial resilience and mindset and risk. Now the question is, how do you just make it, and how do you channel this energy into innovation and entrepreneurial thinking from children? Now, I am not advocating for us to be teaching them business models and how to make money when they are in 5th grade. I think that is a disservice. I think when we talk about innovation and entrepreneurship, it should be more about how do you think differently and are having these conversations. That's absolutely important, right from elementary school. That's what I would think. I mean, just don't, I think it's more like don't kill it, because children have it anyway. Right.
Absolutely.
So
I think that's a very valid point, that don't kill it. Absolutely. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. And thank you, Priya. I think that was a wonderful learning session with you, full of energy, enthusiasm, zest. And I think you demonstrated to us how you can walk the talk when it comes to innovation. And that was wonderful, as far as every one of us, young or old, sitting in this room, picked up so many practical tips based on your experience and suggestions. Yes, please.
I just wanted to say it is such an honor and privilege to be here, today for several reasons, including nostalgia. Bombay is where I grew up. So, I just feel bad that I'm not there in person, and I hope to see, all of you in person. And it's such an honor, and Professor Mani once again, and Dr. Dhingra, it's just, and everybody in BMA. Thank you for having me over here today. It was just going back home, so it felt good.
So should I say it was a ghar wapsi for you? And thank you so much for expressing that. And I want to particularly take this opportunity to once again thank Professor Dhingra. For us, today is the beginning of a relationship with the late K.S. Basu Memorial Trust to bring in more value-adding webinars, conferences for the management fraternity. And I'd like to request Mr. Dhingra here to wrap up this session on all our behalf and make a few concluding remarks. Over to you, sir.
Professor Mani, thank you again for your kind words. There is really nothing more left to say. The enthusiasm of your outstanding speakers, as well as the audience, the interaction, the questions. As Dr. Priya said, it brings back fond memories of Bombay. Like her, I grew up in Bombay, and this is a wonderful opportunity to connect. But more importantly, it's not about me or my fellow trustees, and Ernest is here with us, Mr. Ernest Fernandez is here with us today. It's about the memory and the legacy of Dr. K.S. Basu and some of the valued lessons that are still very valid today, particularly in this environment, even though he grew up and practiced in an era where trying to show him what email does was like wonders. He never really got to use it much, but he was he was wowed by the technology. So thank you. We look forward to the continued collaboration, and this is a wonderful start. I know you have additional events planned, and I look forward to attending them and learning from them. I'm a lifelong learner. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Dhingra. You rightly said it. We are all into the journey of lifelong learning. Thank you, everybody, for being here right through. I must confess that this was the record attendance of all the webinars that we've had starting January 1. We had 180 people who had logged in, and they've been here right through at different given points in time. All of us know that holding people on a digital platform is more challenging than holding people together on a physical platform. But nevertheless, Professor Anjan Das and Dr. Rangapriya have actually made the impossible possible. It was a wonderful evening of learning. As we do in BMA Parampara, let's have the videos on for everybody so that we have a group photograph, though digitally, so that we can share with each other the memories of the time we spent together. While all of us gear up for the group photograph, I know some people need an extra second to get ready for the group photograph. I want to share with all of us that tomorrow morning, we have a very unique session, which is rare on Saturday, but it was worth the effort. We have the legendary Mr. Pramod Bhasin, who's going to share with us his leadership lessons. All of us know about the wonderful work that he did in taking GE to great heights in its Indian operations. Tomorrow evening, we have a very rare session in association with the Pala Management Association in Kerala and TMI Network on the topic of minimalism. And this is being presented by Professor Jubilant, who has done a lot of research in this area. As usual, our next Wednesday Wisdom webinar this time takes us to management lessons from the armed forces. And we have discussing with us on this topic, Captain Raghuraman, a war veteran and an CHN expert, who is going to talk to us about how to survive, succeed in a ruptured world. And as I told you a little before, kahani sunne ke liye agle shukrawar zarur aana, but it is going to be business storytelling by the renowned Ajit Kamath in our next Friday Fundamentals. Of course, all members of BMA will get their notifications. All those of us who are guests today, please join the BMA family. Let's make it stronger and make this learning moment wonderful as far as our country and as far as society goes. Our efficient secretariat consisting of Lakshmi, Oindrila, Supriya, they do a wonderful job behind the scenes. They are our digital photographers also. I call them the Atmanirbhar BMA team. They can almost do anything digitally, and we've all learned from each other over the last 9 months. Lakshmi says, task done, time to say good evening, goodbye for the time being, and let's part for this evening. Enjoy a great weekend and look forward to meet all of you again. Thank you, Priya. Thank you, Professor Dingra, and thank you, everyone. Shubh Ratri.